Utah state's lawmakers have introduced a bill that would ban the display of pride flags in schools and government buildings, while allowing the display of Nazi and Confederate flags under certain educational circumstances. The controversial proposal, which has sparked heated debate, would prohibit the display of pride flags, citing the importance of maintaining a neutral space. However, lawmakers have argued that historical flags, such as those representing Nazi Germany and the Confederacy, could be as part of the state's curriculum on World War II and the Civil War. This bill, which has already passed committee approval, has drawn strong criticism from residents, particularly from the LGBTQ plus advocates who view it as discriminatory and harmful. The story is from Newsbreak by The Independent, published on February 14th, 2025. Aaron, I'm coming to you, my friend, my fellow friend who has big Ziz energy. Namaste. Namaste. Yes.
I will try to remain calm.
Yes. 4-second inhales, 4-second outhales. I don't even think the outhales is a thing, but I just made it. So check this out. What does it say about Utah's priorities that pride flags are banned, but Nazi and Confederate flags can be displayed for educational purposes?
It's just bigotry, plain and simple. They're just bigoted. I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand why they're against people displaying flags. I don't understand why they're against transgender people. I don't understand why they're against gay people. I don't understand. Nobody's knocking on your door saying you have to be trans, or you have to be gay, or you have to like monster trucks, or you have to like Green Day, or whatever you think people are going to force you into liking or being or doing. That's not happening. And nobody's doing that with your kids. Oh, it's just like nobody's making anybody be anything that they're not. You can't do it. You can't do it. If you would just go talk to somebody who's in these groups that you want to be against and ask them about their experience, you'll quickly understand that that's just who they are. That's who they were born at. And they can't change it. They can't control it. It's who they are. And maybe that might help these people understand we should probably stop this. And instead of focusing on shit that doesn't matter, because displaying flags doesn't fucking matter, maybe we should do things that actually help people. Maybe we should solve some actual problems in the world, like homelessness, income inequality, food deserts, poverty, you name it. Climate change. Maybe we solve some problems that are actually impacting people's lives and actually causing people to die, instead of whether or not somebody can display a flag at a fucking high school. Oh, I'm just so... Back to you.
Here, just get your chakras together.
Did that answer your question?
It did. Lotus, come together, lotus flower. Get your chakras together. It's all good. I get it. Yes. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. I get it. Yes. Very good. No, I get exactly what you're saying. Like, there's so many things that, even if we're looking at the state of itself, with its own House, its own Senate, its own government, can tackle so many different issues that are, I would say, up front and in your face, rather than worrying about how to separate displaying of flags, which happens to be either pride flags versus Nazi flags versus Confederate flags. It's insane. And I mean, like, well, okay, if even if I give you like the argument for educational purposes, could not the display of pride flags also be just considered an educational purpose as well? This is a group of people that have their own way of living, their own philosophies, their own culture. And they also work on how to interwove that culture within the greater society. And I would even say that the state of Utah, in of itself, as you mentioned, Aaron, has those bigger fishes to fry, right? Especially when we're talking about income equality, when we're talking about homelessness, when we're talking about unemployment, when we're talking about education disparity, when we're talking about people who happen to be hungry, when we're talking about people who don't necessarily have the proper social safety nets in their particular lives in order for them to thrive, that they have to rely on others in order for them to be able to see the next day. But we're concerned about pride flags. Is this what we're doing right now? Wow, that's crazy. So, Infidel, I want to come to you and ask you, how does this bill fit into the larger trend of government efforts to control symbols and speech in public spaces?
Oh, I think that what we're seeing is that I don't think this is just about flags and about public symbols, but I think it's about controlling ideologies while suppressing others. I think that what they want is, I think that there's certain people in our population that these people like Trevor think need to be put in their place. When they see a person who they go, oh, they're pushing their agenda on us when they see them in a game show. But they don't think that if it's someone that's heteronormative, they don't even see that. So I think that it really is a goal of putting these things back into the closet. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that one reason that school's important where they don't want these to be shown is I think that they actually want students bullied who don't fit into their category. I don't think this is something incidental. I think it's a goal. There was a time where I would think I would be being alarmist by taking this position. But I think that at this point, what we've seen, especially when we've seen people run campaigns over 0.1% of the people being the problem with this country, we're seeing people being sold a bill of goods for their own self-interest, and because I do believe that they want to see certain people brought to bear in society, and for them to be reminded that they need to know their place, as disgusting as that is.
What does that even mean, know your place?
What that means is you do what I want you to do, and you act the way I want you to act, and if you don't, then you're being out of line. Because that's what they believe. When they see someone like you or someone like me or someone on this panel saying certain things, we're being out of line. We need to know our place because we're being uppity, so to speak.
Well, for a lot of these people, a mere existence of trans people and gay people counteracts and contradicts their entire religious worldview. And so even seeing a trans people causes them such cognitive dissonance and that they just have to make it go away because it's so contrary to their religious beliefs.
It forces them to address aspects of reality that they don't want to address. They would rather cause that person harm than to have to be an adult and go, maybe I have a bad idea that I need to reconsider. That's a much easier thing, just cause someone else harm.
Yeah, it's called the la 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 I don't hear you effect. Yeah, so AJ, what impact might this law have on the LGBTQ plus students, especially considering the high rates of suicide and discrimination they already face?
Yeah, I think especially for transgender people, but not trying to discount the experiences of all other LGBTQ people, but transgender people specifically have such a high rate of suicide. There was one of the students at a high school in Utah that gave a statement when testifying against that bill, and she said she clarified this exactly. Kids know about this, okay? She said that queer people commit suicides at higher rates than everybody else. This is not because they're inherently prone to committing suicide or to having mental health issues due to their sexual orientation or gender identity, but rather it's because of how they are treated. And if you pass this, you will have queer blood on your hands. You know, maybe the kids are gonna be all right. Like it seems that they have a good head on their shoulders because apparently everybody else in federal government doesn't. For example, last month, the White House, with an executive order, just denied the existence of all transgender people, non-binary people, and intersex people by signing this order that said that we're only going to recognize two sexes now, male and female, and that's it, and they can't be interchangeable. This isn't scientific reality; it's biblical reality. Okay, and it is the only place where such a thing exists because science does not agree with the binary biological sex idea that they're trying to put out there. When I read the White House terminology, I was really shocked because there's a part that says that female or male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces, either large or small reproductive cells, respectively, right? I was like, was that written by like a middle schooler? Because that is not how you talk about biological sex. Like when you're looking at biological sex, you have to think about chromosomes, you have to think about genitals, genes, hormones, brain structure. And when you say things like at conception, you're implying that the moment that egg is fertilized, then biological sex is magically, determined. Like that is inaccurate, okay? Like at conception, there's only like two of these main factors that determine biological sex that are available, which is chromosomes and genes. So you don't have brain structure yet, you don't have hormones yet, right? So how you don't have genitals, obviously. And up until like around 8 weeks is when hormones are beginning to be released in the body, and the embryo starts to shape sort of those genitals. So up until 10 to 12 weeks, you can't really distinguish a male versus a female based on genitals. Okay, so like that's just that. Just based on that, how can these people be saying, "Oh, you're gonna be either male or female," and like completely erase the experience of like people having all of these different factors at birth? It's just mind blowing to me the way that they can just completely throw away all the science just to like be like, hey, the Bible says this, so that's it.
Well, first, let me say something, AJ. The people that wrote that law, or that executive order, more accurately, are the people that would have cheated off of us in high school biology. So start there. That's the kind of people we're talking about. But by the description they use, the best I could figure out is that everyone's female according to their definition. But I digress.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Muted.
I am muted. Thank you for telling me that, Aaron. I had my mind elsewhere. Well, when you start talking about sex. Oh, this is not Thursday. Anyway, we did a show on a nonprofit months and months and months ago. I want to even say it's within last year, where we talked about the complications of sex and how it is so easy to reduce sex into male parts like a penis versus female parts, which is a vagina. But we don't take into consideration chromosomes. We don't take into consideration hormones, gametes, the brain, chemistry, and how even like a person who may be transgender would have like issues concerning, presentation versus, what's going on with them biologically when it comes to sex. And all those things are going to play in how, one may, classify themselves. I hate to use the word classification. I wish I could come up with a better term, but that's the only thing that's come to my mind right now. How they would classify themselves, in which you say, how do you identify, right? So I think that when you're reading the White House release statement on their idea of what gender is, right? And also how they conflate gender with sex, because gender and sex are not the same. They are always going to come up with a very reductive middle school term because they don't want to get into the minutia of the complications of sex and how it is presented. Because that's going to force you to say, hey, maybe the way that we are looking at sex and the way that we are also looking at gender is way more complicated than what we think it is. And it actually deserves more pontification on how it is presented, depending on the individual. How I present myself may be to the fact on how I was classified at birth. I don't have an issue with that. But I cannot, with any good reason, say that my experience versus another person who may not necessarily identify the same way would be. And I think it would be very arrogant of me to be able to put my sensibilities on how a person is supposed to identify just because a doctor back in the day said that this is what you are, that you're supposed to be. And I think that that's the same thing that the White House and all those who happen to be of that ilk do. And it's not right. And I think that when it comes to any of these things, and I always say this, no matter what we're trying to explore as an individual, when it comes to how you identify sexually and how you identify gender-wise, that is a very personal thing. And that person should be able to explore that with whomever they invite to help them explore that with. Whether if it's their doctor, whether if it's family members, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to ask the entire panel, what can communities push back against policies, or how can communities push back against policies that selectively suppress certain identities while allowing historically oppressive symbols to remain? Or do we even want to do that? I want to start with you, Infidel, then Aaron, and then AJ. I like you to Randall.
Well, first, I wanted to touch briefly on something you said, and that is you're absolutely right. It's trying to make everyone fit into a specific little box, and it comes from a perspective that your experience as a human being is identical to mine. And if your experience as a human being is not identical to mine, somehow it's not legitimized. And that's a very dangerous thing, because no two people in whatever classifications we can choose are going to have the identical experience. And the more diversity you have of people, the greater that experience that people have is going to be diverse as well. But as far as pushing back against this, I think that is the first thing. And because if people want to go and see an example of what Nazi is, I don't think they need a Nazi flag. They've got YouTube and Elon Musk, so they can see what that's about. But it's pushing back against this narrative that we're going to.
I was going to throw in Infidel CPAC. We saw Nazism all over CPAC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's alive and well. Back when I had ties to neo-Nazi organizations, they would never be this bold, but now we've made that normal. And that's one of the things that I think that's important that we do, is take that away from them, is try to fight against that normalization that's already in place, because we've seen things that would never be considered norm. 5 years ago, I would have laughed at you if you just said somebody would have done this and not faced consequences. But now we see that on a daily basis. And I think that that's going to be our most important thing. Aaron mentioned it, maybe not tonight, but on maybe a previous episode even, is the fact of pushing back, because it's not a matter of just disagreeing. It's a matter of not just being silent in disagreement, but pushing back against that, not being complacent when we see these things being normalized. And I think that's something that's probably the most important thing, is to continue pushing back against that.
Yeah, I think you have to get involved. And when organizations, whether it be the governments or school boards or schools or whoever, start to enact these bigoted laws or these bigoted rules and regulations, you have to get off your feet. You have to call, you have to make phone calls, you have to go places, you have to let people know this is unacceptable. You have to shame people into doing the right thing. You have to have your voice be heard. You can't just sit back and think, well, somebody else will take care of it. You have to take care of it. You have to go do something.
Yeah, they claim that this is for that they are going to allow the Nazis and Confederate flag because this is for educational purposes. But then let's talk about Stonewall, right? Like, let's talk about the LGBTQ history. Let's put it out there. That, right? Like, people should demand that. Like, parents should be like, hey, send letters to your local schools. Influence said it really well, and Green Day also said it really well. Okay, silence is the enemy, and if we stay quiet, if we don't say anything, if we don't speak up, then the enemy is going to win. So yeah, I think that's the way that we push back. That's the way that we can.
Silence is consent.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Exactly.
It really is.
Well, as they say, if you've got 9 people having dinner with a Nazi, what do you have? You have 10 Nazis having dinner. So, that is the bottom line.
Yeah, I just wonder when is enough. When are there finally going to be consequences? Where's the line? I want to know where is the line, because there doesn't seem to be one.
I don't know.
We're going to find out.
Yeah, it's buried under the sand right now.
Well, I think that we're currently in our FAFO stages, people. We're going to fool around and find out, right? But if I were to put on my best representative from Texas, Jasmine Crockett voice, let's be clear. This isn't about censorship or teaching history. It's about control. Utah lawmakers are pushing a bill that bans pride flags in school while leaving the door open for Nazi and Confederate flags under the guise of education. And it's disgusting. The message is loud and clear. LGBTQ plus students don't belong, but symbols of hate and oppression still do. This isn't a legislation about hypocrisy. It's cruelty dressed up as policy. Queer students already face disproportionately high rates of bullying, depression, and suicide. A pride flag in a classroom isn't propaganda. It's a sign that says, you are safe here. Meanwhile, Confederate and Nazi flags, regardless of intent, have long been used to intimidate and harm marginalized communities. When lawmakers single out pride flags for removal while defending historical value of symbols that tie to genocide and slavery, they are preserving history. They are not preserving history, rather. They are choosing a side. And it is not the side of inclusion, education, or basic, decent humanism. It's only to push the rhetoric and the narrative and the propaganda that they want to espouse. And that is other people as much as possible in order for us to feel good about ourselves. But I know a way you, dear viewer, can feel good about yourself. You can click here.